Welcome back to the series on connecting Laravel with Angular 2. We already built the backend, we built a part of the frontend, and very importantly, in the last video, we learned how we can solve this problem with having two different domains talking to each other. Now I want to finish the Angular 2 frontend. So in my quotes component, I'm looping through all the quotes and I pass them to the single quote here. And there, what I want to do is I actually want to add some edit and delete buttons. So here in the panel, well, not body, this should be the panel footer. Here, I want to add a couple of links. I'll have an edit link. I'll have a delete link. And well, if I click edit, I actually want to open an input here of type text. And then I also want to add a new link or show another link where I say save or cancel. So I'll group them together in some divs. The input, save, and cancel should only be shown if I'm in the edit mode. Otherwise, I'll be able to either click edit to enter this edit mode or click delete. Well, for this, I will add a new property to the quote component. I'll name it editing and set it to false initially to show, well, we're not editing. I'll also add the added value property and set it to an empty string. And then I will use those both methods to use the editing property to conditionally show this input field, only if we are editing to be precise. And on the other hand, the other div is only shown if we are not editing. Well, and then I want to bind the input here with two-way binding. So therefore with ngModel to the added value property, an empty string at the beginning. And then it's time to hook up all those links. So here when we click, I will call on update. And if I click on cancel, I will call on cancel. And if I click on edit, I will call on edit. And guess what? I will execute if I click on delete. I will execute on delete. Awesome. So these are the four methods I will execute depending on where I click. So let's add them. I have the onEdit method, and there I want to set editing to true to enter this editing mode and show the input. And I want to set the added value to the value of quote content. And I'm not binding directly to quote content because I'm using two-way binding and I don't want to edit the quote before I actually clicked save. Therefore, I use a separate property to store that value. Now, if I click on save, I will execute on update. And here I will then actually reset the edit value to an empty string and set editing to false. But we also need to reach out to the backend. So I'll go to the quote service and add a new method here, update quote, and I will get the ID as an argument and the new content. So let's name it new content, for example, which will be a string. And then in there, I will return an observable sending a put request since I set up a put method or a put route on the backend, if you remember this in an earlier video when we created the Laravel backend. And here, of course, I'm reaching out to the very same URL, but not slash quotes, just slash quote, and then slash and the ID. Remember, this is how we configured that route on the backend in an earlier video. The second argument will be my body, so the data I'm sending. And here I will store this in a new constant JSON stringify. We'll turn it into valid JSON. And I want to stringify an object here where I actually have my content and assign this new content value. So this is the body I'm sending. And if you're in doubt which format you need, have a look at the Laravel application. In the quote controller, you will see that put quote will actually try to extract the content field here on the data it gets. So therefore, you need to pass this content field here as a data. Well, and I will also set up some headers, and this is actually important. You saw this when we tested our API in Postman. There, I also was very specific about the fact that we're passing JSON data. So here I'll actually create new headers. Headers is imported from @Angular HTTP. And in the constructor of this object, I can pass an object where I set up my headers, and I only want to set the content type to application JSON. And this is very important. We need to pass these headers as a third argument in our put request. Here we have an object where I assign headers to headers, and headers here as a key name is just a key Angular 2 will recognize. And I need to do this to tell our backend, hey, you're getting some JSON data. So with this, I'm sending a put request, and in the quote component on update, I can therefore reach out to the service after injecting it. So let's inject it, quote service of type quote service. Make sure to also add the import. And then here I can simply say this quote service update quote. And I need to pass the ID. Well, I can extract this from my quote I'm having here. And I also need to set this new content. And this, of course, is added value before we reset it. And I, of course, also need to subscribe here. And in the callback, where I get back the updated quote, I will simply say this quote equals quote. So this is just the quote I'm getting back from my backend after I successfully updated it. The issue though is right now I'm not really getting a quote. Instead, if we have a look at the service, I'm not mapping it, I'm not transforming my response. So let's do this, let's add map here. And I get back a response of type response right now. So let's simply map this to call response JSON. Since again, if we have a look at our backend, we see that we actually in the put quote method return an object where we have a quote property, and this object will be turned, or this array will be turned into JSON, keep this in mind, where we will have a property named quote which holds the quote. Therefore, I can simply get the body, this will be this object then, and if I then try to access a quote property on it, this will work because this is just what this object has. So with this, I'm updating. Now, I also want to be able to delete, of course, so on delete. And I also need to be able to cancel the editing, so on cancel. Well, if I cancel, I simply want to set editing or edit value to an empty string again, and editing should be set to false. And maybe I should reset the edit value empty string here after I got back a value in the update method here, to just reset it after we got the new value. And with that, I can move on to deleting it. Here, again, I need to create a new method in the quote service. So let's add delete quote here. I'll also get the ID of the quote we should delete as an argument. And then, as you know it, I can simply return this HTTP delete because I want to send a delete request. Copy that URL, including the ID, because I need to send the ID here to have a look at the routes we set up in the Laravel application. And this is all. I don't need to pass any body or headers here because I'm not sending any data with the request, so no need to set the headers, and obviously also no need to set the body then. And with that, I can go back to the quote component and call this quote service delete quote, pass this quote ID, so the ID of the quote I want to delete, and then subscribe to it to actually fire that request, and maybe only output something to the console once we did delete it, or throw an alert, do whatever you want to do. So with this, we should be able to edit, delete, and so on. Of course, we also want to be able to create a new quote. So in the new quote component, here I will actually create a form, remove action though. And this form will have a div with the class form group. This is some Bootstrap class here. In there, I want to have a label for the content of the quote. And I want to have an input of type text with ID content and a name of content and ng model, because I will use the template-driven approach of accessing this form. So I will let Angular 2 automatically manage and detect this form for me. I will use this trick of getting access to the form by binding this local reference here to ngForm. And you should be aware of this. I also covered this in earlier videos. With this, you're getting access to the form Angular 2 infers for you. And then I can pass this form in the ng-submit directive, which listens for the submission of that form, which should execute the onSubmit method. I will need to create this and pass this form here, this form Angular 2 listened or created. So I also need a button. This button will receive some classes. Button and button primary will be of type submit and will have a caption of submit. So with that, I'm able to submit that form. In my new quote component, I therefore need to have my onSubmit method. I know I will get the form of type ngForm, which I'll import from @AngularForms. And I also need to inject the quote service. So private quote service of type quote service, of course. And there we need a new method again. We need a method for adding a quote. I'll place this at the top. So add quote. And here all I need is the content. So let's name it content of type string, of course. And here I will also return an observable, sending a post request to that URL you already know, to /quote at the end only though. And we need to have a body here. This body will stringify an object where I do set up the content, which will hold the content I'm passing here as an argument. And I will set up some headers here. So new headers, pass an JavaScript object to the constructor and set the content type to application JSON, since you're sending some data with that request. So here I'll pass the body as the second argument and then an object where I configure this request and specifically where I set my headers now. So with that, I got this post or this add quote method added. In the new quote component, I can now reach out to my quote service and call add quote and simply pass the form value content property. Content because I gave this input here a name of content. And again, I will be able to access it because Angular 2 automatically infers this form, and I added ngModel to this input to let Angular 2 know, hey, please watch this input. And with this, we're creating a new quote. I can then call form reset to reset the form. And I want to do something else. I want to subscribe to this add quote method, of course, because it returns an observable, and simply throw an alert quote created once I'm done. So once this new quote has been created. The missing piece now is to add router links so that I'm able to switch between pages. So in the app component, I'll actually add my router link here to the quotes link, where I say go to an empty path or just /, so to always go back to the root route. And on the add a new quote link, I want to load the new quote path. This is the second path I set up here. Now with this, let's have a look at the running application. And of course, you could improve the look of that navigation up there. It does work though. Oh, I want to add a new class here to my input though. The form control bootstrap class to make it look nicer. So now it looks like this, a very long field, but it doesn't matter. So new quote. Let's see if it works. If I hit submit, well, it opened on a different window here, but I got this quote created alert. And if I click on the quotes tab here and click get quotes, you now see I get the some quote, the old quote, and the new quote. And now let's also edit it. New quote 2 maybe. Let's click save. Well, seems like this didn't work out. It's gone. So let's reload and fetch the quotes again. Well, it kind of worked. It did edit it, but we seem to have a problem on our front end here. So let's look into this in a second. Let's try deleting it first though. if I reload now and get my quotes again, it's gone. So the two missing pieces is to better update the front end once we click on delete or once we save it. So let's have a look at our quote component. So on update, so the save and the delete button, these are the issues. Now when saving here, the issue we have is that I assign the quote I have here to the new quote I get returned. Now I can simply update the content of the existing quote instead, because that is what I change. So I can set this to this added value before I then reset added value. So this should make sure that I correctly reflect the new content. And on deleting, well, I'm not seeing this because I'm not taking any action here, right? I'm only logging quote deleted, but I'm not taking action on my front end. Instead, maybe I should do more than just log this. Would be nice to emit some kind of event to my quotes component, which holds the list of all quotes, so that this component can then delete the quote I deleted. So I'll add an output here, an event basically. Make sure to import output from @Angular core. I'll name it quote deleted, and this will of course be a new event emitter, as we always set up our own events like this. Import event emitter from @Angular core. And this event emitter will simply hold the quote we're deleting. So there I will simply then execute quote deleted, emit a new event, and I will emit this quote or pass this quote as a value. Well, in the quotes component, therefore, here in the template of that component, I can now go to my single quote and instead, or not instead, but besides passing some data into this, I will now also listen to the quote deleted event and execute the onDeleted method once this event occurs, and then execute the onDelete method in the quotes component, and will here simply access my quotes, not the service, all quotes, and splice to remove a quote. I need to know the position of the quote I want to remove though. So I can find this by accessing my quotes, and then the find index method, which allows me to search for a specific quote. And here I will simply search for the quote element, which of course is of type quote, which actually satisfies this condition. Quote element ID is equal to, well, I will get the quote which was deleted as an argument. I know that because I pass it through the event emitter. So which is equal to quote ID of the, well, the ID of the quote I deleted. So this is just how find index works. It executes a closure which has the quote, so each quote of this quotes array, but quote by quote, as an argument. And then here, I either return true or false to indicate, hey, is this the quote I was looking for or not? And if it is false, well, it is not the right one. And this will only be true if the IDs equal. So this gives me the position of the quote I want to delete. And then I can simply splice position and only one element, of course, because I only want to delete that specific quote. And this should clean up my quotes array and remove the quote once it was deleted. The important thing in the quotes template, therefore, is to also pass on this data. So with $event, I'm passing the data I'm emitting to the onDeleted method. And keep in mind, I am deleting, or I am emitting the quote I was deleting. So with those two changes in place, we should be able to reload this app, click on Get Quotes, edit this, cancel this of course, edit it again, click on Save. Now we see the text reflected here, and we see that if we reload and get the quotes again, this is persistent. And if I delete this, it disappears after a couple of seconds or milliseconds. And if I click on Get Quotes again, it doesn't come back because it really was deleted on the server. And we shouldn't see any errors in the console when we do all those things, when we add a new quote. Again, got the alert on a new window, but it was created. Get quotes, added, do all that, works just fine, as you can clearly see. And this is how we can connect our Angular 2 frontend application to our Vue.js backend, Vue.js to our Laravel backend. Vue.js is what I will have a look at next in the next videos of this series. I hope you learned a lot here. Of course, these are only the basics about this connection, but these basics are extremely important, and this is how you generally connect your Angular 2 application to any backend, or in this example here, of course, to Laravel. See you in the other videos. Bye.